All right, guys, welcome to the Creo Collective webinar where I have the famous Fritz with me. He's got his fish in the background. I expect nothing less. This guy has been a mentor, friend, pulled me. He's the guy that pulled me aside in the Rockies and said, "I think you probably suck at prayer." And I'm like, yeah, that's about right. And has been a mentor and friend, agitator, someone who's helped me to really grow and ask a number of deeper questions about my life, my faith, the journey that I take with others, with my family. And so, man, I just appreciate you being here with us, Fritz. And when I was thinking about some of the things that our network really needs and would benefit from, one of the things that came to mind, and I thought probably a great way to start the year, because it was the way Jesus started his ministry, was to retreat and break away from the crowds and the chaos and to get alone with the Father, to hear from the Spirit. Mm-hmm. And you have been a mentor and sensei when it comes to that. So I thought, what better way to start the year than to invite you into a conversation about what that looks like and maybe why. And perhaps that's the best place to start, is maybe the why. When did you start retreating, and why do you do it, and what's that like?
Well, thank you. I'm honored and privileged to be with you and the Creo family. I'm just so excited for what God's doing in and through Creo. Only the Lord and his signature can explain all that's going on. So I'm grateful. Before I get to your question, I just want to highlight my Denver Bronco fleece, which obviously is a team that sucks the most in the NFL, and half its coaching staff is gone before the season's end. But then I just want to highlight my good friend Mike Gerald gave me my Chicago Bears stocking cap. And I grew up in Chicago and then spent 22 years in Colorado. So I'm a bit of a schizophrenic football fan of the two worst teams in the NFL, but I'm okay. I'm okay with that. Let me begin by giving a simple illustration. There were two lumberjacks who were in a wood cutting contest. It was basically all day, start at 9, end at 4. So a Herculean effort. And one of the lumberjacks had this sort of like little tent near where he was chopping wood. And the winner would be the person who chopped the most amount of wood. And so they started chopping and going at it furiously. And interestingly, one of the guys would stop and go back in the tent and then come back after about 10 minutes. And he did this every hour. And the guy who was just furiously working was saying, what's this guy doing? Is he getting a drink? Is he taking a nap? What's he doing? And at the end of the day, the guy who took the break every hour clearly chopped far more wood than the guy who just kept on chopping. And the loser looked at the winner and said, "What'd you do? How'd you win? What were you doing?" He said, "Well, every hour I paused and took my axe and sharpened it so that when I started the next hour, I had a sharp axe." Well, you probably all were following along. That's where I'm going. As I look at the landscape of leadership and really the condition of the souls of men and women in the church, particularly those who are leading, I think very few take time to sharpen the axe. And we're so busy. There's so many demands. There's so much pressure to perform and to lead that we basically say, I just don't have time. Or some say, I don't know how to pause and sharpen the axe. Let me take it even a step deeper and take it to the scriptures. I want to share with you one of my early life verses that today profoundly anchors me and drives me. And it's from the book of Proverbs, and it's Proverbs 4, verse 23. And that verse says, above all else, diligently guard your heart, for from it or out of your heart flows the well springs of life. So above all else, so there's this top priority. You were to guard your heart and cultivate your heart. And you ask, why is that so important? Well, Solomon answers it. He says, from out of your heart flows the well springs of your life. In other words, all the things that your life is defined by, all the roles and responsibilities, flows out of your heart. Now, the thing that concerns me is as I look at the landscape of leaders today, not only do they struggle in sharpening their axes, I'm not certain they know that they have a heart pulse. They're so busy managing all of this outer world, this life of all the things of ministry and of family and friendships, hobbies, all those things, that we just neglect the fact that our heart is desperately crying out to have the opportunity to be cultivated, to be strengthened, to be transformed. And you ask, what's the heart? The heart is the place of our affections. It's the place of our passions. It's where we're, in a sense, anchored to the Lord and to this daily privilege of walking with King Jesus. And the heart is where it's our emotions. It's what gets us up and helps us go to bed at night. And so for years, this verse has been the anchor and the defining point of something that a friend of mine named Steve Hudson and I developed a number of years ago called intentional living. The idea that we need to live with a sense of purpose, focus, intentionality. So let me explain what that intentional living concept is very both broadly and briefly. At the core of it is the idea of guarding your heart. What are you going to do to keep your heart alive, passionate, growing toward Jesus, toward yourself, toward your spouse if you're married, toward your family, friends, co-workers? See how I'm saying? So that's at the core. So I could just stop there and say, if that's all I'm doing, that's pretty important and pretty good. But to use a Stephen Covey phrase, we talk about guarding your heart and connecting the compass to the clock. Well, what do we mean by that? Well, the compass is direction. It's true north. Most of us, and probably those on this webinar and who will be viewing this later, are pretty good compass readers. You have put together amazing ministry plans. You are a strategic thinker. You just breathe and birth vision. And so early on in my ministry, I would create these great ministry plans. I was a youth pastor for 22 years. So I'd have this great plan for what youth ministry would do, because yearly I had to come up with plans as part of my reporting to my senior pastor. Here's the thing that killed me. I would create this wonderful document. I'd share it with the senior pastor. And you know what I would do? I would put, and again, this is before we had computers, I would take and put that folder in a drawer and just do youth ministry like I always did. The idea here of connecting the compasses to the clock is developing rhythms that you actually are putting into your calendar, things that are priorities to you, beginning personally, which is guarding your heart, and then with the 4 to 6 big rocks of what define your ministry, your role and job that you currently have. So that's this whole idea of guarding your heart. And the crazy thing is, I'm not built well for this. I'm the party guy. I'm the guy that just wants to have a good time. I want to empower people. So the idea of taking time away does not come naturally. But like most of you, I've had experiences in my life that have been sort of like wake-up calls that say, wait a minute, you're running on empty. You're not walking in the Spirit. You're walking in the flesh. You're in a season where things are sort of, if not dark, they're shadowy. All of us have shadow places in our lives. And so the idea of guarding my heart just increasingly became a priority. And the beautiful thing, and this is why I love the Creole community, beginning with Steve Hudson and some others, I had accountability and co-journeyers with me that we learned together. So let me stop there. Mike, any thoughts, comments there you would like to make, or something you'd want me to clarify?
Yeah, I mean, what was there a moment, an experience, maybe a season that caused you to feel the necessity of, man, I gotta break away. I need to retreat. My heart, my soul just really need this. What motivated you to begin a journey that then became a repeated pattern or rhythm?
That's a great question. Because because I was in youth ministry and started there in my 20s, I found the fact that I had stayed in a church 6 years in youth ministry in Chicago. Then I moved to a church in Denver, Colorado, actually Littleton, Colorado, and I was in youth pastor. I almost was perceived as an expert. And God was just very gracious in a lot of things that I was doing. He was blessing. Here's the key thing. So I'm moving into my late 20s, into my 30s. And here's a powerful quote from Warren Wiersbe that created the pivot point. He said this: don't sacrifice depth for area. What that means is depth is guarding your heart. It's your passions, it's your disciplines, it's the things that make you alive. That's depth. Area are the roles and responsibilities that we all have. And I found myself growing in my area to the point where I was sacrificing and neglecting the depth of Fritz Dale. And that just began to show itself in feeling like I can't keep doing what I'm doing and pretending. I can't keep rolling it on in my marriage with so many responsibilities. I had one moment when I came back from the church, and our daughter was 2 years old, and our son had just been born, and Connie greeted me in the front door. And I saw that look, and I knew something was up. And she just looked at me and she said, you know, Mandy and Matt would like to know if they have a daddy. And I had no words, and that's very unusual for this verbose individual. And I literally turned around, walked back to church. We were living in the parsonage, and told my senior pastor I'd no longer be coming to the 6 a.m. Wednesday morning prayer time. I called Tim Lewis, a student at Glenbrook North High School, and told him I would no longer be picking him up for the student prayer group that met on Thursday mornings at 6:30. Interestingly, when I stopped being part of that student prayer group, that thing exploded. Now, maybe you've had similar experiences, but that was Jesus's not just nudging, that was sort of the 2x4 saying, you can't keep living this. You might think you're great and everybody's applauding all your success, but you're basically neglecting your heart. Jesus said, what does it profit a man if he should gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? What does it profit a man if he should gain the whole world of ministry and forfeit his soul, his relationship with his wife, his kids, his physical health, all of that? Most of us have been in those points of journey. So, Mike, that's what pivoted me in, because of Steve Hudson and I wrestling together, saying we need to start building into our lives this rhythm of caring for our souls, making our families, our marriages a greater priority, taking time for the physical nourishment of our bodies, all those different things. And so that's what happened. And that's when we began to unpack these rhythms. So let me
Yep.
say one, I'll let you stop there, but I have two other thoughts, but your comments there, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And we have on this call a combination of people that are doing full-time vocational ministry, BIVO, COVO,
Yep.
disaster relief, safe families, across the board, different types of work, and all of them on the front lines of mission, innovation, impact. Now, here's a question. Is this luxury or necessity, right? When people hear something like retreat, they're like, yeah, that would be nice, but do I really need to do that? Is that necessary? So I want you to play like the spirit of Christmas future and tell us what happens if you don't retreat. What's at stake for you? Um, what's the potential fallout for what you're trying to create if you don't prioritize breaking away for rest, retreat, renewal?
Well, that's a great question. Let me start with a quote from Chuck Swindoll that tells you how old I am. He said, "Beware of erosion." What a great statement. Most of us don't wake up one morning and say, oh, I'm just going to neglect myself or my marriage or my family and just chase the ministry dream. It's this slow drip, this erosion that ends up where you become, I'll give you a few phrases. You become sort of a shell of a person. You spend so much time giving energy to being on the front stage that you don't know who you are and how to operate on the backstage or off stage. Paul Tripp talks about that. The other thing is your heart begins to either become hard or become a bit numb. And you're sort of knee jerk, you're just painting by numbers. I found in the seasons where I was not taking time to cultivate my heart were times where I was not creative. I found myself far more in the have to versus the want to in terms of ministry, or even the things like honoring my wife and taking the times to invest in my children. Here's an interesting phrase that scares me. You can't give away what you don't have. And I think when you are not cultivating your heart and you're not sharpening the axe, you can't give away what not only you don't possess, but what Jesus would have for you. My friends in the Two Rivers community talk about the importance of giving fresh bread when we serve the sheep. And that's a passion of mine. Even as I think of this call, I don't want to just, I'm not going through a folder right now. I'm saying, Lord, would you just give me fresh bread for these men and women? That doesn't happen unless I'm taking time to be with the Lord. The other thing is, I think one of the overall mottos of life and of ministry is I want to start well, I want to run well, and I want to finish well. And my guess on this video Zoom call, that, as you said, there's people of all stages. So I've been jockeying with Doug Weaver about, he's an old guy and all that bit. But I think in the heart of Doug Weaver, he wants to finish well. I know that's true of Dave Sulak. But there's probably others who are in their maybe 20s or 30s, and they are wanting to start or run well. You don't do that unless you take the time to cultivate the heart and feed the soul and be able to give Jesus away because you've spent time with him.
No, that's super good, man. a few of us I know on this call, Aaron Loy, I think Fritz might be on here. A few of us have had the benefit of being with you at your cabin. And the best way I could describe it is an experience. Experience. And I'll paint the picture by saying that Fritz will pick you up, a group of you, take you on a 2 hour, 3 hour drive. And in the course of this drive, we would tell our life stories to each other. And then, we'd show up at some fish museum. And then we'd go from the fish museum to the dive bar with the world's largest muskie that was ever caught.
Hallelujah.
And
The shrine.
then you go from that, and we'd all, have to pay our respects and do the sign of the cross. And then we went from that to your favorite brewery up there. We sat around the table together and told stories. And then from that over to the cabin and spent a few days at the cabin, which, Fritz has this way of making everything feel like he's just pulling it out of his ass, but there's a lot of strategy and thought that goes into everything that he's doing. And so we'd walk down to the lake, and he'd pull out a couple of sayings or readings from his back pocket that are laminated for everybody to read something. And then he'd crest the top of the hill with a plate of cheese that was cut up for us. And he'd create these experiences and ask meaningful questions of a group of people as we're together over the course of multiple days to pray, to be refreshed, to hear from God. So I'd like you to speak for a moment to the benefit of the team experience, and then maybe the strategy of the what and the how you create an environment where people both bond and hear from God.
Yeah, let's start with this team idea, since you described it so well, and then I want to talk about how do we individually cultivate our hearts in rhythm. Probably the most significant word I can give you as you men and women work with teams. That could be one other person. That could be a team of 3 or 15. I don't care what the size of it is, but here's the job description that I would give to all of us, and that is being environmentalists. Now, interestingly, too often we approach ministry meetings, events as master planners. That's how I was trained, and I was trained quite well. But the idea of being a master planner is I will plan this, I have my process chart, and it's all organized. And men and women, that is good. We've got to do that. But if that's all we do, then it's sort of us creating and driving the agenda. And typically we pray either before or after the staff meeting or the event and hope that God blesses it. This is why the word environmentalist absolutely transformed first my approach to prayer, but then it applied to not just my ministry. It's the fact that my 19-year-old grandson came for a week before Christmas. And I just said, Lord, how do Connie and I create the best environment for Jaden just to experience life and to have fun and to talk about his girlfriend and talk about the crazy things of the first semester of college. I want you to hear that environmentalists, here's the key phrase, partners with God. It's the Holy Spirit's partnering with you to craft this environment where you can have an agenda, you can have a process chart, but you're not so tightly holding on to it because you ain't the master planner. You're just building this environment where you're inviting the Spirit of God, the presence of Jesus, not just to be in the midst of it, but to have full permission to interrupt, to intervene, change things, have stuff happen that's just like crap. What am I going to do? Jesus is big enough when he is the master planner in the environment to take care of that. Here's one last thing about being an environmentalist. When you create an environment, you don't control the outcomes. Wow. When I plant my garden, I don't control the sun, how much moisture, the stupid rabbit that ate my beans this last year. I don't control that stuff. I want you to hear that, even in this context of how do you create life-giving, spiritual new experiences for your people, that the outcomes aren't on you. What an amazing, freeing, releasing, relieving thing. Now, in environments, in this stuff at the cabin, I want to do things that are life on life. And that's everything from going to the moccasin bar to see the biggest muskie, to everybody shopping for the food, to us taking a walk of silence down the road, to a pine tree, to us sitting and being able to read through an article and talk. But it's different elements, listen carefully, that apply to the head, the heart, and the hands. Head is what I know and think. Heart is more emotions and passion. And hands is how do I put that into action? So in environment, you just got a whole lot of ingredients. Think of it as a tool chest. So I've got a tool chest of articles, of ways that I want people to connect with God in retreats of silence where they have 30 minutes to 60 minutes just to be alone with the Lord, reading through scripture. I want to have the times where people are in prayer together, that they're just enjoying food. They're enjoying just sitting by a fire on the shoreline at our cabin watching the sunset. My point is, all of you have tool chests. And with today's technology and access to resources, you probably got plenty of resources and tools, but it's building the environment, whether it's taking your team on a staff retreat or doing an hour of prayer together, or what you want to do with your kids on vacation this summer that would be so life-giving to them. Mike?
No, it's beautiful. And even the combination of, all right, here's a list. You three guys are going to go to this side of the grocery store and pick up these items. The rest of you are picking up these items. We're going to cook. You're going to cook. You're going to clean. You're going to chop wood. It's all about the experience, even to the getting stuck in the middle of the lake on a boat.
That ran out of gas.
when you talk about losing control, that was a moment, Fritz, when the rest of us looked at you thinking that you were going to have some sort of parabolic moment, and then we realized that this wasn't a purposeful thing, but we were stuck right in the middle of the lake with no paddles, with no gas, miles from where we were supposed to be. Suddenly you're taking your clothes off, thinking about how far you can swim.
Yeah, let's move on if we could.
Oh, that's so great. Fritz, let me ask you this. How do you plan it and structure it? If you're mapping it out for a group of people, are there certain questions that you ask? Are there certain elements that you want to make sure in there? You just kind of map out a couple key things that people want to consider if they're trying to craft an experience over a few days for either themselves to retreat or for their team.
Well, a more general way to ask that is, I want to create experiences where they encounter God in meaningful ways. I want to create experiences where they encounter each other in meaningful ways. So, for instance, to create a time of silence and solitude where they're alone, and typically with newer groups, I will give a guided tool for them. With groups that are pretty experienced, I don't need to give them a guide. the Holy Spirit will just meet them and they know how to move there. So for them to encounter God, it's those type of things, being alone, it's reading through scripture, it's a simple question. So for instance, like I would say to all of you today, wouldn't it be incredible if in the next week to 2 weeks, you would get alone with the Lord and ask the Lord, what were the 3 biggest wins of 2022? And what were the 3 biggest disappointments of 2022 for you in ministry and personally? Then just that exercise, you and Jesus, is powerful because it gives you perspective. It helps you sum up whether it was a great year or a crappy year and you're ready to quit. But it's that type of the power of that question. Then you take that question and you say, you either share it with your spouse or you ask your spouse to do the same thing. And then the two of you are sharing that. You can do that with your team. And so in the situation that Mike's talking about, I might send all these guys out around the cabin by the lake to wrestle with that question. Then an hour later, we come back and we share our answer. And now you're building community that's coming out of one's encounter with God. Now we're encountering each other with some pretty deep stuff. Those disappointments could be absolutely brutal. And they haven't had a safe place to talk about that. They haven't felt a sense of trust and community. Thus, they struggle with being isolated in a disappointment that could have been ministry-wise or personal-wise. Those are 2 examples of the encountering of God and the encountering of one another. But also, this is overstated. Let's be human. Let's have fun. Let's play together. Let's eat together. And let's have a schedule that's not so full that you're just running from one thing to another. And most of us are so tired of seminars, conferences, webinars like this. Sorry, Mike. Where our hearts just long to just be alone with the Lord or to be with a few others, or the schedule and the time frame, it isn't jacked up in all this content and knowledge. We've got more knowledge than we'll ever put into practice. We just want to experience Jesus and experience one another in authentic and life-changing ways.
Yeah, and Fritz, one of the things I also deeply appreciate is you do this yourself, you do this with teams and with other people, but you also do this with family. And I think the benefit to thinking about, all right, I probably need to process the past year. I probably need to get strategic about the coming year. It would be good to break away and pray and get alone. I also, if you think about your team, your micro church, imagine if every micro church, rather than thinking about, the only tool that we have to get across to people is a small group Bible study in a home or a sermon on a Sunday or something like that. What if we had in our toolbox, you mentioned toolbox, like let's retreat as a group. We want people to grow in prayer. They probably need environment and experience to be developed in the area of prayer, and just doing a class or a webinar isn't going to do it. So let's take these people away. Let's go together as a group, as a family, to say stuff like, what do we want to accomplish as a family this year? What are our goals, dreams, visions as a family? And to create space for a few days as a family. So I'm hearing you, and I've seen you model something that isn't just for an individual thing, but it's for teams, it's for businesses, it's for small groups or micro churches, it's for families, right? Like what we're talking about here translates into a variety of context and very different groups of people, right?
Right. And I want to give you all 2 words that sort of make or break it, because this is not easy. It's almost reprogramming ourselves, particularly if we're type A, driven leaders, busy people, and you're really good. Richard Owen Roberts said that the most dangerous people in the church are the most gifted, because they end up not needing Jesus, because their gifting allows them to pull things off. Maybe a whole nother webinar on that one. So here are my 2 words that what Mike just talked about will make those things happen. Scalability and customization. So what's scalability mean? Let's say you want to grow the practice and culture of prayer in your team, or even in your micro church or small group. Here's the point. Maybe don't start out with a half day of prayer, because most of the people don't even know how to spend a half an hour in prayer, let alone 4 hours. Scalability means you start slow. What about Bob, the wonderful movie, Baby Steps? Sorry about that. So scale it to not just the people you're working with, but for yourself. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. So scalability means you start off where people take the next step, not a leap. And that's been something in the last, 5-10 years, I've been more and more disciplining myself with people that I'm mentoring, and talking about disciplines. I'm saying, what's your next step? Not like, oh, how are you going to become this prayer warrior? Take the next step. Customization is so important because it gives you the freedom to really listen to the Spirit of God and, in a sense, reflect on either yourself or your team and customize it so that it fits that group. So the idea that might be with a group of leaders who really want to play together. I've also been with groups of people on spiritual retreats, and they want a whole day to be with Jesus. Fantastic. But because I know this group, I'm going to customize it to fit that group. So as you think through the teams that you have, or think through your marriage or your family, and you want to do something where you're creating an environment, you want to take the next step, whatever that is, customize it to your family. Now, Mike asked me to talk about the how of intentional living and guarding your heart. And I'm going to give you the most outrageous, idealistic idea of how to create spiritual, life-giving rhythm in our lives. Are you ready for it? This is ideal. So, ideally, I want to spend 30 minutes a day with Jesus. I'd like to take 2 hours a week, typically on a Monday morning, just to get away and reflect back on the last week and think through this current and upcoming week. And I'm just doing stuff that renews me in that 2 hours. So it's maybe creating a prayer list just for that week. Maybe it's reading something, it's worshiping. I don't care what you do in that 2 hours. Now, scalability for those Mondays, that 2 hours a week, start with an hour a week and grow into 2 hours a week. Start with 30 minutes, but you're pausing before you just jam into the week, saying, Lord, what do you have for me? 30 minutes a day, 2 hours a week, 1 day a month. We call it the personal retreat day. It's getting away, so I don't do it in the office or wherever I'm available, and I'm crafting a day that both renews me spiritually, personally, as well as allows me to sharpen the axe ministry-wise. So I'm saying, what are the 3 things I said last month were absolutely non-negotiable, the big rocks, and what are the 3 things I need to do in the month of January? And each month, as I take this 1 day away, I'm just reflecting on that. Maybe I've got an issue that I just need to write out on a pad of paper, some ideas and thoughts. Now, I said scalability. So most of you, if you've never done this rhythm of a whole day away, start with 2 hours away. Start with a half a day, so you know that by after lunch you can get at prepping for a sermon or whatever you have to do, okay? And let it grow. Now, customization, men and women, make this 1 day fit you. What is it that renews you? So for Fritz Dale, on my personal retreat day, it almost always includes some element of physicality, exercise. So I'm in northern Wisconsin. There's snow on the ground. So I will try to swim at the YMCA as part of my personal retreat day. Some of you might say, that's not spiritual. All of life is spiritual. My point is, customize it. Now, I want to speak to those of you who are either bivocational or you're saying, Fritz, my rhythm doesn't allow this. There's where scalability and customization can work. In other words, you got to get creative to find the beginning place, the platform to start with Jesus and say, Lord, would you help this work? And this whole idea of 30 minutes a day, 2 hours a week, 1 day a month, you might say that just doesn't fit me. Well, guess what? The Lord is big enough to customize that. Here's the last thing. Actually, two. So 30 minutes a day, 2 hours a week, 1 day a month, 2 to 3 days a year. I call that an annual planning retreat, annual getaway retreat. That's really what I was bringing Mike and these friends onto. It was more of a spiritual renewal retreat, not so much a planning retreat. It's an extended time away with the Lord. It can be alone or it can be with a group of people. And you're just, in a sense, allowing that time to have a spiritual component, planning component, community, encountering each other, fun, play, that type of thing. That, again, for those of you who are not full-time ministry, you might say, that's impossible. Do 1 day, 2 days, I don't care. But you're saying once a year, Lord, I want to look back on this year and let you speak into that. And I want to look ahead to the next year and say, what are the 3 to 5 big rocks I've got to give attention to? That's called living on purpose, living with your priorities. Here's the last thing. Most of you are going to shake your head. If possible, the idea of a sabbatical every 5, 7 years. Some churches have policies, some don't. Some of you working say, doesn't even make sense, Fritz. Obviously, the sabbatical concept is more in academia, but fortunately in the church world, we're doing more of that. In the marketplace, they can't spell sabbatical. That's like, that's losing money, profit, all that. But I want you to hear the Shabbat Shalom concept of what I've just said. Rest and peace. So that's how you personalize it. And Mike and I can start downloading some resources of how do you spend a day a month? What are some ingredients for that? What do you do in that 2 to 3 days a week? We've got materials, tools on that. Even what do you do with a half day of prayer? All that stuff. So, Mike, that's an awful lot, but I wanted them to hear this ideal rhythm. And I've spent 35 years battling for it. And I'm just not wired well for it. My friend Steve Hudson, he's just an ace in the hole with this. I struggle. And I'll say one other thing. You want to start building this rhythm into your life and ministry, I'll guarantee you spiritual attack will be right next to you trying to undo what God wants to do in this opportunity. Guard your heart and to be with Jesus.
That's fantastic. I'm super glad we recorded it because I think it'd be good to go back and process all that Fritz said. And before we open it up for questions, for the sake of having this on the recording, let me just real quickly share my screen and encourage you guys, if you go on the Creo website here, you can see some of the stuff that we have coming up here. We got this 6-month formation and coaching journey. If you click on, if you'd like to be a part of that, that's offered to you. Hop on and sign up, or the personal development pathway. If you'd like to be a part of that, hop on and sign up for that. We're accommodating evenings, early mornings. Want to make sure that people that are working normal daytime hours are able to participate in the stuff we do, both early morning, evening, weekends, that sort of thing. So also once a month, we're going to be doing Creo calls in the evenings as well. We got a vacation coming up in February. So if you're not already signed up and want to come, get in on that. We're really excited to get away together. So thanks for tuning in. You got a final word for people that are watching this later, Fritz?
I do, and that was obnoxious. But I want to leave you all with this sort of one final thought, and sort of in two parts, and it's this: who you are is more important than what you do. Now that, oh yeah, let's salute to that. But day to day, most of us don't live that way. We're chasing all the stuff we have to do. But over the years, people remember who you are more than that one message, that one house church, what have you. And then I'll leave you with a powerful, powerful statement by Bill Kokenauer, who's been a friend of the Creo family, really for years. But he said this: the most important thing is not what you accomplish, but what you set in motion. And I have been pondering that for some years now. And it's driven my prayer life, that most of us are chasing things to accomplish. We want to remember our legacy for what we've accomplished. And Kokenauer's word is, no, maybe it's what you set in motion. And if that's true, for some of us, we're not going to see the fruits of what we set in motion, but we'll know that the Spirit of God has been faithful and gracious in using us as these jars of clay to set in motion things in the name of Jesus. And I couldn't be more grateful, more humble for how God does that.
Thank you so much, Fritz. That quote really hit me, especially thinking about our friend Jeff Sorvik and what was set in motion. So that's a great reminder. Hey, thanks a lot. And be sure to jump in with us next week in our Creo conversations, where we're going to talk about how to implement the stuff that we talked about today in the webinar. So we'll see you next week.